Welcome to the AI Institute for Next Generation Food Systems Spring Speaker Series. My name is Hannah Bartram, and I am the APHIS Education and Public Engagement Coordinator. Today, we are delighted to welcome Oliver Vince, co-founder of Basecamp Research. And before I introduce Oliver, let me give a quick introduction to the AI Institute for Next Generation Food Systems, also known as AIFS or APHIS. The Institute was established in 2020 under an NSF USDA NIFA grant with the mission of developing and leveraging transformative AI for the ethical production and distribution of safe, sustainable, nutritious food with fewer resources. APHIS is a multidisciplinary collaboration between researchers at 6 different institutions conducting research with a holistic integrated view of the food system, solving challenges in molecular breeding, agricultural production, food processing and distribution, and nutrition, and the people behind the food system, using AI and technology as an enabler. And if you would like more information on the research engagements activities of APHIS, please visit our website and connect with us on social media. Our speaker series features thought leaders addressing food system challenges using artificial intelligence. We hope you will join us again for the upcoming talks in our series, including one on Wednesday, April 6th, and you can register for these events at the link at the bottom of your screen. All of the recordings from our speaker series are posted on our YouTube channel, which you can find a link to from our website. And today we are delighted to welcome our first speaker of this series. Oliver is a co-founder of Basecamp Research, a London-based biotech startup that specializes in exploring nature to discover and design biological solutions. By partnering with biodiversity hotspots and biotechnology companies across the globe, they are addressing the systemic challenges that limit commercial biodiscovery. Combining exponentially growing data collection capabilities with purpose-built graph architecture provides Basecamp Research with a vast, comprehensive, and unique view of Earth's metagenome, allowing complex design problems to be addressed with ease. The team at Basecamp Research spans an enormous range of expertise, from explorers and diplomats to data scientists and biotech pioneers. Before Basecamp Research, Oliver completed an undergraduate in engineering science and a PhD in cancer research at the University of Oxford in the UK. And thank you so much for being here with us today. There will be time for questions at the end, so I would encourage you to submit your questions throughout the talk. There's also closed captioning available. Welcome, Oliver. I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Hannah. That's very, very kind of you. And it's a shame this is not in person. It would have been great to have been doing this talk in front of a live audience, but you know, that's the way it is these days. But generally today, I would really love for everybody to be able to jump in and ask questions. I'm going to be running you through generally how we look at the world, how we think about biodiversity, how we think about biodesign, how we think about AI, and how it applies to food science. And for that, you know, we have a general way that we're looking at it. We have a general way that we're building the company. We have a general way of approaching it. But generally, you know, feedback on all of this stuff is always super useful. So if there's something that's not clear, something that's a bit strange, something that you're not quite sure on, please just jump in and I'm sure we can have a great discussion. So the talk, hopefully I'll go on for sort of 40, 45 minutes and then open the floor for questions for whoever wants to ask about them. So I just want to say thank you very much to Hannah. Thank you very much to the AI Institute for Next Gen Food Systems for having me. It's an honor and a privilege, and you know, it's really cool to have the opportunity. So let me share my screen now. Can you see me on the slide?
Yes, looks good.
Perfect. So sometimes if it's a live audience, I'd play a game of guess where this is. So this is one of the places we've been, of many, many, many places we've been around the world to look for new and interesting biodiversity for the purpose of translating it into various different biotechnology use cases, all of which I'll go into today. So our motto, just to begin with, is discovering biodiversity together. So we believe that biodiversity holds, you know, vast solutions to many of our problems that apply across biotechnology as a whole, but particularly in the food space. and that if we can discover more of it, understand more of it, learn more about it, we can push forward many of the areas that we're all interested in. We have the word together on the end because this is not something that we can do on our own. No matter how big we get, this is always going to be a partnership with both the people, the expertise downstream, so the people who are developing different solutions to foods, to pharma, to whatever else it is on the downstream, but also to the partners on the upstream. So when you access biodiversity, you access people's land, people's areas, places that people care deeply about. And so we work very, very closely with everybody that, on the ground in both biodiversity and biotechnology. And there'll be a bit more about that today, but always happy to address any questions. But today's talk is going to be focused largely on the technical angle. So on the work that we do with biotechnology companies, because I think that's most appropriate for this audience. However, we can also do many hours of talking about the biodiversity side if we're interested. And that's something that I would always be happy to talk about as well. So as a very quick introduction, Hannah did a very kind introduction to us, but we are based in London, which sometimes looks like the pictures here, but very often doesn't. Often rainy and horrible and miserable. We're based in Clerkenwell, right in the centre. So if anybody is in London or wants to come by, we'd always welcome a friendly face and take you for coffee or a beer. We were founded in 2019, so the very end of 2019. We raised our first round of funding in May 2020, so in the middle of the pandemic, which was a weird time to start a company, kind of upend your world in one way and upend it in another way as well. But since then, we've raised another round of funding in sort of June last year, and we're now in the state of I mean, I'll qualify everything by saying we're still pre-Series A, so everything here is sort of caveated by that fact. Once we've done the Series A round, we'll go be able to go much bigger and much further, but just helpful to have context there. So our mission as a company, amongst many of the angles we work on, is to reconnect biotechnology with biodiversity. So fundamentally, we believe, or the foundational belief of the company was that everything we've done in biotechnology has at some point come from biodiversity. And the original biotechnology, so growing crops, growing beer, doing fermentation, all the original things that we did with biotechnology were very directly linked to your knowledge of biodiversity. So the more you understood about the crops, about the local environment, about different plant species, about different pests, the better you were able to do your biotechnology. Obviously, in the last sort of few decades, that's become quite a separate field. The people who work in biotechnology at the very cutting edge very rarely interact with biodiversity, and we at least believe that's to their detriment. We think that if we can connect these two worlds, there's a lot of benefits that would be associated with that. So, I mean, always want to start with the team. So this is not me. This is a team of 20 of us working full time, and then a team of board members or investors and advisors as well. And I think the most important thing here is to stress the breadth of work that people do in this company. So as I said, we're only 20 people at the moment, but we have everything ranging from people who engage with the UN and work on all of the sort of very, very upstream end of the working with biodiversity, all the way through to some of the greatest explorers in the world and the greatest data scientists that I've ever met. And also some fantastic people on the partnership side who work on the translating this into useful cases for everybody. So the talk today, I was asked to give a title for the talk, and I actually read it back and I thought it didn't really make much sense. So thought I'd start today by going through what I actually meant to say here and explaining a little bit about the context of the talk and what we want to be talking about today. As I said, if there's any questions as anyone's as we're going through, please just jump in and ask. So the first part of the talk is, the first part of the title is Discovery Enabled Biodesign. So what we mean by this is using discovery of the natural world to enable the ability to biodesign. So it's not trying to biodesign with the knowledge that we have today. It's going out to nature, going out and expanding our understanding of what's out there to allow us to biodesign. In my mind, in my view, the biodesign capabilities we have today are limited by the information that we have available to us of biodiversity. So the first step to all of this is doing discovery in the right way, controlling that discovery, doing it in a scalable, ethical fashion, which allows you to do efficient biodesign. And then the second part, it was and by design specifically, today I'll be referring to the ability to predict, understand, predict, and optimize complex functions, properties, and performances of proteins. So the ultimate aim of all of biodesign is to understand the complex features of a protein or a biomolecule or an organism or whatever it is that allows you to then begin to design. If you understand exactly how it's built, how it works, all of the different features, you can begin to design in the truest sense. Through exploration, so what does that mean? Exploration is very literal. We actually do have a team of 4 very, very professional field scientists who go around the world working in lots of different harsh environments to get to the end of the earth to find new biologies for all of us that are of interest to the scientific community, and particularly you guys in the companies and the institutes that you work for. And going back to the original point I made earlier, biodiversity will be quite a strong theme throughout all of this talk. Biodiversity is a source of all biotechnology. So if you can tie together biodiversity with biodesign, we believe that you're onto something. It's not easy, but that's our general goal. So I've already covered what biodesign is, but it's all about getting to that end goal. It's all about moving from a world where we have to test everything we do in a lab. Everything that we do, everything that we predict has to be built up and scaled up and worked on in a lab, to something where we can begin to understand the complex functions, properties, and performances in silico. And that's not just your original things like the very, very basic first level annotations, but can you move to complicated areas? So I mean, I'll get a bit more specifics on that in a minute, but the key aim of all of this is to move towards predictability. So reducing the cost, reducing the time, reducing the development of all of these processes is something that's incredibly important for all sectors. So I mean, I've got on the slide some sectors that we're working with, we're thinking of working with at least, and here's a summary of who we're actually working with. There are many, many, many sectors of the bioeconomy that all functionally operate in the same way. They have a set of proteins, they have a set of biomolecules that they want to understand, they want to use, they want to optimize, and we believe that if we can gain a good enough understanding of these proteins, of biodiversity that they come from, we can generate insights that will be useful across all of these sectors. So circled here are companies and projects that we're actually working on, and we believe that there's no reason why we can't expand into the others. And I think this is the beauty and power of using techniques like AI in these sorts of fields. Increased predictability, using it as a platform allows you to move across different fields very, very quickly, adding value. And whenever you start talking about AI in any of these fields, the obvious criticism is like, well, at some point it needs to be scaled up. At some point, if it's in pharmaceuticals, it needs to be validated in a lab in clinical trials. If it's in the food space, it needs to go through FDA regulations. And there's all sorts of other permitting processes. I'm not ever saying throughout all of this talk that that's not going to be necessary at some point. It's about increasing the chance of success, reducing the cost, reducing the time, and improving the predictability of this, because there's so high failure rates across all of these systems consistently, and it's just something that's become sort of systemic across the whole industry, and it's something that we're looking to solve. Now, as a bit of a sort of third point, as a higher level aim, the world currently relies fundamentally on petrochemistry. We would like to see a world that relied fundamentally on biochemistry. I think we all understand why it's a credible route to a cleaner and more sustainable future. It's not the only route, it's not the only technology that's going to be necessary, but it's going to be a very important technology, and we want to play a fundamental part in accelerating that area. So I was at the Future Food Tech Conference last week, and as this is an audience of people interested in the food space, I thought I'd summarize some of the thoughts that I had after listening to quite a lot of the talks and speaking to quite a lot of the people there as to how what we're doing relates to that. So, there are complex functions are key. So things like taste, nutritional benefits, and function. So complex functions of proteins. So this is not, is it a certain amylase? Is it a certain protease or anything like that? It's at the end of the day, does it taste, does it scale, does it perform, does it do things like foaming, does it do things like gelling, all of which are not inherently linked necessarily to what's obvious about the protein. So at the moment we work with protein sequence, we work with protein structure, but often you can't use the information captured within that to understand whether it's going to work on these timeframes. And so the ultimate aim of all of this is to move to a situation where we can start to predict, start to understand the relationships between things like taste, nutritional benefits, functional properties, in a way that's scalable, in a way that works across all different properties. And eventually all of these are just performance criteria. So in AI, you need performance criteria. All of these from an AI perspective are performance criteria. Can you predict that there are certain outcomes that you can predict? And in theory, if you have enough information about the underlying proteins, you can get to a point where you can generate and understand these functions. Now, I will qualify this by saying we are a long way from that. I think the whole field is a very long way from that, but it's not about whether you can achieve it today. But the beauty of a startup is that you can build a startup entirely in the framing of what would I do? How would I do this? What's the underlying approach? Can we take a different approach to this? So hopefully by the end of the talk, you'll see that Basecamp Research is taking quite a different approach to understanding these functions, to understanding this across a generalizable platform. And it's again a startup, so we're aiming to sort of de-risk this as we go forward. And I'll show you some of the case studies that we've worked on so far later on today. So again, predictability is the most important thing. I think someone described it as the Holy Grail. I can't remember who it was, and I won't name names. But this was at the Future Food Conference, and I think it's becoming quite clear that the money you could save, the time you could save, and the amount of investment and the amount of acceptance of failure rates could change drastically if you had increased predictability. What's quite clear as well is that it's not just IP, it's not just patents in the food space. The quote I like is that the competitive advantage in the food space is now becoming not much more from speed and execution, but speed and execution as much as IP is starting to play into it. If you can move quickly with a new protein, with a new functional ingredient, that's as important as being able to protect it. So as people start to understand these things, as we get further and deeper into all of this, it's not good enough to rest on the laurels of IP. You have to move quickly, you have to innovate, you have to be at the point where you're working on this. And then the final point is that there has been a very slow adoption of AI. And I say that not as a criticism, more as an observation when you compare it to obviously the tech space, but even things like the pharma space and things like the human microbiome space. There are all areas where the food space seems to be quite a long way behind, and that's not because I mean, when making this talk, I was trying to have a think as to why and to what's going on, and I think there are fundamental limitations that make it very challenging. It's much more challenging to understand taste, nutritional benefits, and functions of a protein than it is to do many of the other things AI has been successfully used for. But in theory, it can still be done. And if you were to try and do it, how would you do it? I think that's what I'm going to try and answer today, or at least what our approach is. So just to reiterate the problem with what we see today, you have a public catalog of proteins, you have a lab which takes a long time to run, it costs a lot to run, and it generates small data sets. Even the mass screening of proteins, so even if you can screen 1 million by 1 million every day, you are still not even beginning to tap into the complexity of the protein universe. And also your lab by definition is only working on optimizing one function. It doesn't generalize, it doesn't work across many functions. And there are many platforms that promise this, and there will be many inventions and many innovations there. They will all be necessary. But fundamentally, relative to the size of the problem space, they are still very small data sets. And finally, the third part of this is that the pattern recognition is often done by humans. And humans are very, very good at pattern recognition. It's one of the strengths of humans. It's one of the things that's allowed humans to become the dominant species on planet Earth. But they're not as good at pattern recognition as a computational tool. The problem with the difference between a computational tool and a human is a human can infer information from a wide variety of sources. A computer can only infer information from what it has in front of it. So what we work on at Basecamp Research is providing computers with the information they require to make the same inferences that a human could make, but at a much bigger scale and a much faster pace. So this is a bit of a cheeky slide, but what I'm trying to show here is, or trying to make the point here is, if you could have some kind of neural net, some kind of graph network, some kind of AI algorithm that would just be able to predict the function, properties, and performance of a protein, you would be able to move very quickly to the lab to have final proof, and your product development will be rapidly improved. So it's not a case of, this is not what we have today. This is not what Basecamp Research has. This is not the not what exists, but it's an important point to iterate that if you could get there, it's incredibly powerful, it's incredibly valuable, and it's incredibly important for both humanity and for the industry. So as a startup, we look at this and we think, okay, that's the challenge we're going to set our sights on. Can we get there? Can we do it? How would you do it? If we can, as a startup, raise tens, hundreds of millions of dollars over the next few years, how would we go about doing this? Because it's such an important problem to solve. It's a very, very, very challenging problem. I have make no caveats there, but how would you go about solving it? And will you see some early successes, and can you prove it along the way? So this is a slide that I quite like, which is, again, I think many people's assumption when they think of AI. On the left is what it's supposed to be, what it's supposed to do, and on the right is what it most often does. And I think this is something that we see a lot, and I think this is something that has always led to a bit of a disillusionment, particularly in the biosphere around AI. There are many, many places where this is not the case, but so I want to sort of dive a bit more into those. So the thing that, you look at the companies on the left, and then they are some of the most valuable companies on the planet. Now, I'm starting from this point because I want to reiterate what these people have done properly. So what has led to these people having a dominant advantage in their space? Now, they work in very different sectors. They work with very different sets of information. They work with very different subject matters in different countries and different nationalities on different areas. But fundamentally, the thing that apart from being the most valuable companies in the world, the thing that is a common factor between all of them is the fact they have a lot of data, and they have a knowledge graph. Now, it's not just good enough to say I have a lot of data, because in biotech, we have a lot of data, but what does a lot of data actually mean? Now, from my perspective, at least, and this is what the way I've been looking at it, a lot of data for these people means continuous controlled access. So it means they actually, Facebook has built a platform which allows it to mine lots and lots of data continuously, and it controls that flow of data, and it can tap into other sources of data where and when it wants to. That for biotech is not really a thing. What we do now in biotech is we build labs to try and generate our own data rather than controlling access of information across the spectrum. These companies have high quality data that's trusted. I don't mean trusted and we trust the companies, but these companies trust their data. So their platform brings in data that's reliable, it's high quality, that they can understand. Their data is diverse and representative of the problem space. I think the representative is one of the most important things to think about in biotech. Representative of the problem space. Protein complexity is vast. Protein complexity is far greater than anything these companies work on. Whether people like movies and Netflix, or whether they buy, whatever they buy on Amazon, that is a far simpler problem to solve. And it's far easier to get enough data that's representative of the problem space than it is in the biotech. But that doesn't mean it can't be done. And today I'm going to talk through how we think about approaching that if we want to. The final point is fully contextualized data. These companies also have a lot of extra information around their data that allows them to generate inferences. So when I said at the start, computers are pattern recognition tools that can make inferences. What you need is the context for which they can make inferences in. And then a knowledge graph is not just a database. A knowledge graph is a different tool. A knowledge graph is a representation of data in a context in a context that allows you to understand the relationships between that data. So it's not just the number of data points, it's how that data is linked. I'll go into a couple of examples now. So if you think about Google, I think these examples are powerful because they're a bit, they seem a bit silly now, and it's quite obvious what the differences are. But you can imagine a time when people had a library and someone suggested Google, and they would say, yeah, you know, why would I care? What's the power of that? Like, I have everything, I have all the information here. But it's only by building Google that it becomes completely obvious what is going to happen or why it's powerful. The important thing about Google is that it has one technique to understand all queries. So it uses the same technique, and it's not entirely true, right? Google's a multinational, yeah, it's a huge company that does many complex things, but at its simplest level, it has a search algorithm which allows it to understand data in a way that no one else did originally, and now it sort of monopolizes that, and its data monopoly is what allows it to be the best performing search engine out there. The line at the top is what they set out to do at the start, and I think that's comparable to what we're aiming to do at Basecamp Research in the biotech space. So this is another slide to sort of compare Facebook with a psychologist. It's important to understand that when we're using AI to predict protein function, we're using AI to analyze protein capabilities, we don't need to think about it as replacing a lab, or we need to think about it as enhancing the capabilities of what we do already, accelerating our performance. And it may not reveal the same things. So if we were to be able to understand protein functions, properties, performances in silico, it doesn't necessarily mean that we don't need a lab, or the lab won't work for other things. But using this example where you compare a psychologist to what Facebook allows you to do, or if you imagine Facebook not as an individual user, but as a multinational company, what it allows them to do, it allows it to map all the people in the world. It allows them to map behavior in real time. It allows them to understand complex inferences. It allows them to use a vast, rich data set to understand things that psychologists could only dream of. Now, a psychologist might get better answers in a one-on-one setting, but it's not scalable. It's very expensive, and it doesn't work across nations. I mean, one of the most astounding things about Facebook, in principle, is it works for all languages, for all people, in all the same way, no matter their cultural differences, no matter how they perform, how they think, how they work together. So from a fundamental point of view, they've built an amazing platform that discovers and mines their data. Now, it's easy to say it works in the tech space, and it has really worked in the tech space, but it's also starting to work in the biotech space. And now this is in drug discovery. This is not the food space, but the sheer value, the sheer drive to do it in the drug space has been incredible. This is kind of the first generation of AI drug discovery companies. There's a far greater list coming down the line for all of us. But it's just important to recognize these techniques do work. I think the other thing that's important to understand in context of this is that these tech companies, we can laugh at and we can say they're completely separate to biotech, but it was a 20-person team at DeepMind that solved the AlphaFold problem. Why was it, from a fundamental point of view, that the largest biotech companies in the world, for whom this is a fundamental critical problem, have not solved this? Why was it 20 people from a tech company that came along and in their spare time, essentially, in the company's spare time, were able to solve one of the biggest problems in science? It doesn't matter to them. They did it as an academic gesture to show their power, show their strength. And it sounds facetious, but then you think about Google, right? Google's definitely moving into the biotech space. Google's moving into the drug discovery space. So to be competitive, like you can sit and you can think these guys are never going to move into this space, never going to help, never going to understand, but they already are. I mean, Salesforce is why are they doing proteins? Why is it not the biggest food tech companies or the biggest agri-tech companies that are smashing out these algorithms, or maybe or doing public displays of performance in this space? So I want to talk about AI and data and information, and this is quite a dry topic, so I want to try and keep it as light as possible, but it's important that we understand. So AI is just a pattern recognition tool. It's not fundamentally more complex than that. We have lots of data on proteins, right? So you can think, biodiversity is great. We know lots about proteins. We have lots of big labs and we have lots of big public databases. But the important thing is, do we have the correct data? Is it enough? do we have enough data that represents the problem space? Do we have enough data that captures the complexity of what's out there? And do we have control over the data supply? I think we'll go into that a bit later. I don't think we do, but that's something that we're addressing here at Basecamp Research. And is it the right data? Is it diverse? Does it capture the full context? Does it capture the information required? If you were the smartest human on the planet and you could understand all the data in public databases, would it be enough information? Would it capture the right information for you to be able to make these kind of complex predictions on taste, on stability, on all the other complex protein functions that we're interested in? And is it sustainably sourced? So something that's increasingly important in every other field of tech is your data supply and a sustainable source? Is it ethically sourced? And that's something that's going to become an increasing issue in biotech. So where does biodiversity come in? So all of this chat about AI, all this chat about data, a fundamental belief of Basecamp Research is, this is a quote from the great David Attenborough, but I think it does summarize quite nicely where this whole field has come in. Nature is our oldest ally and our greatest inspiration. Since the dawn of time, biodiversity has been the source of all biotechnology, and over recent decades, this deep connection has been lost. We believe at Basecamp Research that by reconnecting, we can benefit everybody. We believe that opportunities for you in industry or you in academia will be amazing. You can have access to vast amounts of new information, new captured, new resources. The opportunities for nature are great, promoting bioliteracy, valuing biodiversity, understanding that, something we'll go into a bit more in a minute. And then the opportunities for all. So, if we can connect the two worlds of biodiversity and biotechnology, we are aligning incentives for everybody towards a future built on biology that values biodiversity. So, breaking this down a bit more, how do we think about biodiversity? If you could understand the hidden rules governing protein evolution. So this is not the protein structure, this is not the protein sequence, but it's everything else that exists around the protein in nature. And I think that data, the approach we think is that data is not captured currently in public databases. So, sorry, that's the same point there. So at the moment, do we have sufficient information to use AI to understand, predict, and optimize complex functions, properties, and performances? At Basecamp Research, we believe no. We believe that sequence-based predictions of function, properties, and performance can get you so far. Structures even better. AlphaFold came online a couple of years ago now, and has made that even greater. But what about the things that you can't predict? What about the things that are governed not by the information that's within the protein, that's captured intrinsically within the protein, but the extrinsic stuff, the stuff that's going on around that protein? So you've got the genomic context, the protein's upstream, downstream, the genes regulating it, the wider context of what's going on within that genome, and the microecology context. So I think we'll go into a few analogies later, but all bacteria, all organisms are communicating in this vast web of intricacy, this vast network in nature, and we're not capturing any of that. We're not trying to learn from any of that, really. There's no tool for understanding nature as a network, trying to build in an understanding of all these relationships in many different dimensions. Macroecology is also obviously important, different tree species, different plant species, different biomes, different areas of environment have a big impact on, of course, environment. So, but the bigger thing, so the Arctic is very different to the equator. Why? What's the difference? How does it vary in between? Can we capture that information? And this is really why. So, a lot of the proteins that we use, particularly in the more complicated way, that's multiple proteins working on the same thing, are all essentially from a biological point of view, trying to do one of these few things in nature. Maybe there are some other things going on as well, but they're all either reacting to external stimuli or to each other. And it's this dynamic, symbiotic relationship that's been going on for literally maybe not 4 billion years, maybe 2 billion years, I think, which, we are not even beginning to think about. So what we do when we look at a protein, what we do when we try and understand the proteins, we look at the sequence and we say, is there anything in the sequence that gives us a hint there? And then we get the structure and we say, is there anything in the structure that gives us a hint there? And then, but we're not looking anywhere else. We're not saying, okay, well, where did it live? Who did it live with? Was it these species that had an impact? And understanding this is a very, very complex problem. But being a startup, you can start from that perspective. You can say, right, this is a very complex problem. We are going to go and try and solve it. And this is how we're going to do it. So on that note, well, we'll get into it next step. I think it's important to understand the extra almost complexity here is the multi-scale network problem. So you've got the features that are protein-protein interactions. You've got the things that are reactions between organisms at the micro scale. You've got reactions between microorganisms and the plants or the other fungi around them, macrofungi. You've then got the forests or the trees or the larger environment, and then you've got, looking at rivers from space, it seems like a network. So how does the biodiversity at one end of the river vary from the other? How do the tendrils of the river all interplay? And it's also an evolving factor. So in winter and summer, it's different. Different seasons, whether it's after rain, before rain, whether the lake's dried out or not, they all have a big impact on biodiversity and therefore what's going on. To not stretch the analogy too much, this is how I see what we're doing at Basecamp Research. We are trying to understand biodiversity as a community in the same way that Facebook is trying to understand the humans as a community. So, I mean, fundamentally, do we know anything about nature? I mean, the numbers here are very generous. We know far, far, far less than 1% of what's out there. So at a very, very simple principle, what we're using, what we put into our systems, what we develop, what we work with in industry is coming from such a small subsection of what's out there. That's the first principle. The second principle is that it's not mapped, it's not relatable, it's not understood, it's not networked in the right way, and that is what we're working on at Basecamp Research. So this is a slide here. We call our database imaginatively based data. We thought it was funny when we came up with it, but the key approach here is to not focus necessarily on just beating the public databases. The public databases are, I think, half of it come from only 20 species. You're not capturing the breadth of diversity out there. You're trying to network and understand the relationships between that diversity. It's important to think about the tools that make this possible. From a startup's point of view, you start fresh, you think, right, I'm going to tackle this problem of understanding the network of biodiversity. I'm going to understand life on Earth. I'm going to understand all these grand challenges. And that's what you pitch to investors. And that's really great. And that's all good. But what are the fundamental drivers that are allowing you to do that? I think, ubiquity of DNA sequencing is an interesting one. The cost is coming down. That's great. But it's not just the cost, it's the expansion in use cases, expansion in understanding, it's expansion in desire of various countries, various biodiversity locations to understand more about their nature. So, and what's happening in that field is similar to what happened in the human microbiome space. It started off studying human genomes, sorry. Studying human genomes used to be the remit of academics, it used to be the remit of experts. It's now the remit of professionals, of companies, and doing it on a mass scale. That's something that's going to start to happen in biodiversity once people start to use these tools on a much wider scale. Synbio tools mean that you now no longer have to culture things out. You can just go and you can you can understand the data, you can understand what's going on, and then you can recreate that back at home. Computational mining capabilities, we all know that we've all seen rapid advance there. Same with metagenomics, computational understanding, and data processing. And I think that I've made the point quite clearly about big tech companies, but the way I look at it is that big tech companies have developed a new technology, and it's something that's been vastly overlooked, not in the AI drug discovery space, but in most of the other fields of biotech. Those technologies are fundamental. They are based, the capabilities are based on the rest of it, but the fundamental move forward is the move towards the approach that big tech companies have used. This is a nice picture I like as well, which basically summarizes it from an interesting scientific point of view. It is just cool to see bacteria that no one else has seen before. We've discovered many new species, and this is something that's incredibly exciting for us. I think it's worth mentioning as well that these techniques are also being used in the human microbiome space. To draw the comparison here, we're doing the same thing, but with the environmental microbiome. So talking about information supply is important. So that's why I've labeled so much on the point about information. We need information about proteins, we need information about nature, we need information about biodiversity to allow us to work on all of these problems. When we look at the information supply we've got today, we have biodiversity on the one hand, that's starting to sequence more, it's starting to want to understand more about it. It's got the Nagoya Protocol, which is in place to, in theory, encourage people to come and try and find economic value within biodiversity. And then on the biotech side, you've got many applications. You've got data science and synthetic biology, which are increasingly hungry for more information about the natural world, but that information is not making it across that gap. And there are many reasons we can go into, but I think it's, but I think many people in this field understand the systemic problems with commercial biodiscovery. At Basecamp Research, we have a slightly different approach. We have a sort of dual-pronged approach where we sit in the middle, aiming to be the bridge between biodiversity on the one side and biotechnology on the other side. For you today, I'm talking about the protein discovery and design partnerships, but there's also a lot of work we do on the collaborative relationship with biodiversity hotspots. So how can we help them understand their nature better? How can we help them develop insights? How can we help them develop capacity to do all of this? That's also another whole part of the company that I'm not really going to touch on today. Importantly, our team is representative of these 4 areas of the company. So we have all of our work starts with the biodiversity team, who go out to various countries, who build relationships, or various biodiversity hotspots, who build relationships, who tell them what we're doing, tell them what we're here for, and do a deal that works for both parties. The field science team then goes out to each of these places and works to collect lots of data to understand the biodiversity that's there. The data science team are the team who process this data, understand this information, and translate it into useful insights for partners. And then the partnerships team is responsible for finding new partners and finding interesting problems for the data science team to tackle. So looking at the biodiversity team first, this is some of the reasons why biodiversity, we see that biodiversity is an increasingly interesting position for us to look into. This extra information that's coming out of these, there are 2 sides of this. So the first is that you can collect information yourself, and that's great, but that's not really scalable. The second way of looking at it is if you align the incentives of people who already want to collect this data with yourself, then the data scale is truly exponential. You're not limited anymore by how much you can do yourself. You are aligning incentives with people who want to do it anyway, and you're just providing that an information flow there. Fundamentally, the Nagoya Protocol exists and was developed over the last sort of few years to allow commercial access to biodiversity. This is something that they talk about very openly, and they're very keen. The only two questions that anyone has in this space are, the biodiversity people want a share of the benefits, and the biotechnology companies want to know the permission required. In practice, I think many people will be aware this is all broken down. Very little commercial discovery goes on today, and it's something that we believe is a huge shame, and it's something that we're aiming to fix. To do that, there are many things we have to address in the middle, but things like traceability, clarity, speed, cost, and complexity are all up there. Just to say that we are very involved in the negotiations that are going on at the moment with the Nagoya Protocol around digital sequence information. So many countries, particularly in Africa and South America, are very keen to have their biodiversity protected, and even collections that are not within their country anymore. So countries that are within the US, within China, within Europe, they still want access. They still want some pullback from that, from those discoveries. So importantly, we're as a company positioning as a technology provider. We don't mind. We're not a political entity. We don't mind what they decide. We believe that any of the outcomes, will be positive or negative for the world. We all think, this should be done, and whichever way is fastest to do it is the most important. But we position ourselves as a technology provider. If you want to understand more about that, we have a public position on this that was submitted to the UN last year. Now, just to not drag this on too much, but I think this is important for everyone to understand that this idea of sustainable data sourcing in biotechnology is something that no one's really thought about yet. It's starting to be thought about very quickly, and it's starting to come to the forefront. This was an article published literally yesterday, summarizing the recent meeting in Geneva. Now, this is a public position by the African Union. We will not accept the adoption of the Global Biodiversity Framework, so essentially the Paris Agreement for biodiversity, without an agreement on DSI. So they're lobbying and threatening not to work on it. They proposed a 1% biodiversity levy. That's something that's going to be very, very challenging to implement. And it's just, particularly those of you who are working on consumer products, is going to be increasingly important for you to think about. So then we talk about the field science team, which is these guys have a very cool job. They go around the world, they discover, once we've got the permission, once we've had the arrangement, they go to all sorts of extreme environments. They look for crazy new biology, things that we can learn from back at home. This is enabled by a lab that we built. So the foundation of this company was built off a lab that myself and my co-founder developed and sort of proved on an ice cap in Iceland. That was pre-company, but now as a company, we've sort of scaled that lab up, improved the performance, and we now do this all over the world on site. The data science team, what do we find? This is a summary plot that's actually a little bit old now, but it shows the sort of underlying power of the work that we do. By going out and doing this diverse target discovery, you can see on the left, this is everything that's known publicly about this protein class, and on the right is everything known publicly plus ours. You see that we're expanding protein sequence space in many different places. We're working, the important second part to that is what we've talked about before. So you have the data, you have the data source. Can you put it into a knowledge graph? This is a knowledge graph. It's an interconnected data set enriched with semantics, so we can reason about the underlying data and use it confidently for decision making. So that's what we're building, and that's how the data is processed at Basecamp Research. This is a slide that we use to demonstrate to potential partners how our process works. Importantly, it's a cyclical process. Importantly, we start with benefit sharing partnerships. We start with discovery. We start with identifying lots of new proteins that people might be interested in that we can work on. And then we move around to design and screen in the various different generative or screening techniques that we've built in-house. And then finally, the partnerships team is doing an amazing job of understanding which problems we can focus on first, which problems our tools are particularly useful for. So we don't need to go for problems where the protein function is already very well understood or very strongly linked to the structure or the sequence. We need problems where the protein function is not currently understood. We don't know much about it. Can we help people to understand? Can we provide an addition where we don't have domain expertise, we don't have knowledge in those places, we don't have the lab screening required to develop that product, but can we provide insights in the same way that an AI drug discovery company works with bigger pharma companies? Can we provide novel candidates, novel IP, novel solutions that people might find interesting, that might cut the costs, that might cut the times, and might make their process more predictable? So just a few case studies to show you the sort of thing and how it's evolved. So in the early days, it was very much about discovery. So, we had people give us various different specifications, and they would say, well, this enzyme is really important to us, but there's not many out there. We want freedom to operate. We want things that match certain properties, certain criteria. Now, on the left is a phylogenetic tree of the ones that they sent, saying we want some like the green, we don't want some like the yellow. On the right is the plot that we were able to generate just looking at our biodiversity, with our sequences being in red. So you can see immediately by just going to nature, you can find new candidates. Now, you don't know they're going to work, but it's a good start. The second step was basically to take this forward and to work on more refined discovery. So once you do discover lots from nature, can you work forward in time? Can you work backwards in time? Can you work on what is common between those sequences? What is going forward in those sequences? We have worked across a variety of sectors. So this is another problem we've worked on, which is to do with various different steps in all of this. Working on different algorithms that allow us to understand the different properties of the proteins we find. I mean, I don't want to go into too much detail here, but this is in the nutrition space. This is something that's highly relevant to many, many companies. There are often enzymes that are highly important to the food space, but there aren't many of them in nature. And it's something that we work on helping people out to understand more about it. Importantly, we're doing this all in a domain agnostic sense. So we don't know much about the enzyme class itself. We know a lot about where it came from. We know a lot about the environment that it was found in. And then we're able to, using that information, generate new insights for these companies. The interesting thing here is an enzyme that there were only 4 that exist in nature. This is something that's incredibly important, incredibly valuable to the nutrition space. We were able to, actually, no, this is an interesting one. We haven't yet found more. we've done various different techniques to try and improve it. Importantly, part of our work is actually going back out there. So when we say we don't build a lab, we do build a lab, but it's a lab that goes around the world and works in all these different environments. And then finally, the most interesting problem we've worked on relatively recently was to show our sort of improving performance in predicting, as I said at the start, complex functional, property, and ultimately performance specifications for a variety of applications. This was a problem where it was a very, very valuable enzyme for the cosmetics market, but there's nothing really in sequence or in structure that allows you to identify what's going on with this protein or why it's valuable. Our knowledge graph, our techniques, our learning techniques have allowed us to identify, based on the extra information that we capture from all of these biodiversity hotspots, what's going on and allow you to identify new proteins that meet those criteria. So we start, as a very quick summary, with our data sets. We collect environmental, geological, chemical conditions, hundreds or maybe even thousands of metadata points. We work on predicting the microecology, the metagenomics, the genomic context, and we then use various different approaches to annotate those in silico, going back to the original aims of all of this: understand the hidden rules of protein evolution, generate protein design insights to, once you've got the rules, discover more in nature, and then design more in nature. So I want to thank the team very much again and mention that we are a startup, we are hiring, we're based in London, we have a lot of fun, we go lots of cool places, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Oliver. That was a really fascinating look at the ambitious and exciting work that you're doing at Basecamp and the problems you're trying to solve in the protein universe. And I would encourage those on the call to add their questions in the Q&A section so that we can get a good discussion going here. But while you're doing that, I can kick things off with some questions of my own. So I imagine that you work primarily with commercial partners, but have you explored potential partnerships with academia, and how might that fit in with the work you do, especially in terms of data sharing?
Yeah, so we've done programs with academics, but so at the moment I think most of our academic programs are based in country, so they're academics that are working on biodiversity work anyway. They're interested in finding things from biodiversity, and what we do is we offer to help them, offer to join forces with them. As I said at the start, we do everything together. We work to collaborate with as many people as possible. We learn a lot from working with everybody out there. We have some very cool arrangements with academics who are also kind of in the exploration field. They go out to various different places and we work with them on that. But also when they, when they want to look at their data, when they want to analyze it, when they want to look at it probably for non-commercial purposes, we also do a lot of work to help them there, because that only improves our capabilities.
Yeah, and expanding on that, because Danielle LeMay asked a very similar question in the Q&A section about the role of academic and government researchers in the data consumption side, given that they don't have a lot of money to pay for access.
Yeah, so I want to stress that as a company, we are, let me just stop sharing my screen. As a company, we are, we're mostly academics that founded it. It's more the company is a great vehicle with which to develop and work on these interesting scientific problems. The most interesting thing that we can, the most important thing that we work on is interesting problems. So can we push the boat out with the questions that we ask our data set? And can we do things that we can't yet do? Can we set ourselves problems that we can't yet achieve? And if we can do that, that's something that's incredibly exciting to us. So we're working on improving our technology all of the time, less so working with lots of partnerships. It's more proving that we can do things, because if you can prove you can do these capabilities in a similar space to the AI drug discovery space, in a similar way to other AI-based techniques, if we can show that, we can really, the value is obvious, but it's only if you can show that you can do it.
Sure, yeah, that makes sense. And you're a relatively new startup, and you mentioned that you're still in the process of growing your team. And we have a number of early career scientists here, undergrads, grad students, postdocs. And I'm wondering what specific skills, training, experiences you look for in hiring new talent that are, early career researchers and students into your research innovation programs, given the many branches of what you're doing, but especially in terms of the AI that's at the center of Basecamp.
Yeah, so I mean, with that, I personally never look for specific skill sets. We very rarely write detailed job descriptions. We're looking for an attitude and an understanding and a willingness to work on a broad spectrum of areas. So it's critically important that all our data scientists understand why protecting biodiversity is important and delivering new biotechnology solutions is important. And I think these problems in the UN, these problems with big countries, big unions of countries debating with big companies, you've got some of the largest companies in the world arguing with the African Union about whether their biological resources are connected and all that sort of stuff. In our company, we have a biodiversity team which represents one side of it. We have a commercial team which represents the other side of it. And it's important internally that we are able to connect and communicate in that way. So it's people who are enthusiastic and who are hungry to learn and want to be involved in cool work. I think that's our criteria, and then generally we can find a role for anybody within this company. We do everything from chatting and diplomacy all the way through to sort of commercial and sales development. So anything you're interested in, please come and reach out to us.
Yeah, great, and it is certainly very, very cool work. And we have a question here from Steve Brown. If you had 10 times your current funding, where would you see your company's focus and activity?
Yeah, so I think the decision you've got to make when you have this is, if you were to pour money into this, what would you do with it? So you can either fundamentally work on the technical side, or you can work on the commercial side. So we could say with our current capabilities, we could hire 100 salespeople and we could just do loads and loads of contracts and we could sort of do it that way. But that's not our ambition. That's not how we want to work. That's not how we want to innovate. The commercial work that we do is to validate it so that we can raise investment, and it's so that we can work on interesting problems that we know are valuable to people, not just sort of academic or tangential problems. The tech side of what we do is very, very, very important. And if we were to have 10 times the current funding, we would literally expand our data collection, work it out, and work on that from a expansion of data set point of view, because the more you expand the data set, the more you expand your capabilities, the more you can learn, the faster you can go. So very much on the tech side is the answer.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's see, does anybody else have any questions? We're coming up on time, but we probably have time for one more. Okay, here's one from Gabe Yahtzee. He says, incredibly interesting and exciting presentation, Oliver. Can you say more about how you are benefit sharing with biodiversity guardians and hotspots with novel protein discovery that may eventually be worth billions, and the mindset of benefit sharing versus extraction?
Yep. So now this is an interesting topic, and much longer is needed to talk about this, but there are short-term things that we do, there are medium-term things to do, long-term things that we do, and there are long-term things that may never materialize. So royalties and things that may be worth billions down the line is not really the way of thinking about it that we've seen to work. So with something we do, so we do royalties with the people that we partner with, we give them a share of the money that we make on this. So that's something we do. But going beyond that, what do these countries, what do these people actually want? They want to expand and improve their capability to analyze this themselves. Our dream is not that we make billions of this, it's that eventually we provide a platform for them to sell their own biodiversity. They understand their own biodiversity enough for them to be selling their own products into the international market. So how do you think longer term this? Like, we could try and monopolize and capture all of this ourselves, or you could facilitate this interaction. We want to facilitate this interaction. Therefore, we invest a lot of money, a lot of time, especially proportionally to the company now, in building capacity, building labs. And it's important to have conversations, right? Like, different places want different things. So different places benefit from different things. Something we think a lot about and we spend a lot of time working on. Honestly, we don't have all the answers yet. We don't pretend to have all the answers, but it's something we're very clear, like very, very engaged with. And if anyone here is very interested to talk more, I'd love to catch up on this separately.
Yeah, and we're coming up on time, unfortunately, but I think there's a lot of space for continuing discussion. The work that you're doing is a great fit for the work that we do at the AI Institute for Next Generation Food Systems. we have researchers working on solving some of the problems that you are. So we'll look forward to those future conversations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining us today. This again was a really excellent talk, and I'm sure it got us all thinking.
Thank you very much for hosting me. That's very kind.
Yeah, and for our attendees, we hope you can join us again on Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific for a fireside conversation with Karine Pichara, CTO of the Knot Company. So we'll look forward to seeing you then.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.